Hello, class. Welcome to our first lesson about context, which is feudal Japan. So, our basic information, the content that we're working with is conception. The who we're discussing are samurai. The what is origami. The where, Japan. When, the time period is the Edo period from 1600 to 1880. Why was to make a crane, having to do with sacrifice and wishes for specific things to happen. The process is origami. It's both a thing and a verb. And the name that you need to know is Sadako, who we will talk about in the content section. So context is background information. And we have some essential questions to look at, like where is Japan and what are its geographical characteristics and why are they important? What is the Edo period of Japan? What was the power structure? What is the Sankin Kotai? And excuse my pronunciations, thank you, how it connects to origami. And what you are looking at here is one of the castles of the Edo period. So where Japan is on the world map, you can find us over here in the United States and North America. Actually, we're right about in here somewhere. And right across the world is Japan. Japan is off the coast of China and a wee bit of Russia. And it is not as far south as people think it is. A lot of times when people are asked to pick out Japan on a map, they're down here. But it's a lot more northern than expected. So the geographical characteristics of Japan is it's made up of a series of islands, and they're volcanic-based islands. So it's isolated, both the interior and the exterior parts. Looks like it's fairly close to the Koreas and Russia and China, but it's a little tricky to get to due to currents. It has a variable climate. The most northern parts of Japan and the highest elevations are very cold, and then their lower southern parts of Japan are tropical, and there are lots of mountains. And even though Japan itself is not a large country, it's long and stretched out, but because of all these obstacles, it wasn't easy to get from one part of Japan to another. So the different parts inside tended to be isolated, and that's going to be important. When you look at this map, please notice Tokyo. That is when we talk about the city of Edo. That's the old name for Tokyo. That's its new name. And then later on we'll talk about Hiroshima, which is down here. So the Edo period of Japan was from about 1600 to 1860, which is a relatively long time as far as governing eras go. It was ruled by the shogunate and 300, 200 regional daimyos that kind of changed over time. It had a very isolationist policy, which means that people from other countries could not just pop over to Japan. They did trade with other countries, but it was extremely controlled. They preferred to go there and get what they wanted and then bring it back rather than having strange ships come into their harbors. And when people did ship things into their harbors, they had to go to a very specific place for a specific thing. Like if you were importing, something like paper from China, there was only one place that you could do that. But because of their structure, they had great economic growth and prosperity during this time period. It was a time period of eternal peace. There was no more war. Previous to this time, there was a lot of infighting among various shoguns that was then consolidated and between various nobilities. The population was stable at this time, and that was due both to kind of control factors that were enforced by the culture, and then also some practices resulting from the economy. There were very strict social classes. It was hard to move up and down in a class, and the focus was on arts and culture. And that is one of the emblems of the shogunate. So the power structure, the social structure of the Edo period, very defined. The top levels had to do with the emperor, the nobility, the shoguns, and the daimyos. At the very top is the emperor, and this is a hereditary royal family. But they didn't really have any political power. They were kind of like the Queen of England is right now. She's held in respect, but she can't really do anything. And then underneath the emperor was the shogun, who was the military leader, and he was the most important person. Then the daimyo, which were the lords that held, rule over land. Think of them like governors of states. And then the daimyo samurais, which were paid soldiers. And then right underneath the samurai was the ranyan, which are samurais that are masterless. They kind of go from daimyo to daimyo. And that happens for a couple different reasons. Along with the samurai, both the geisha and the female samurais were all of the same rank. Then there were peasants, which was 90% of the population, so pretty much lots of people were peasants. They lived more into the country than in the city. Under the peasants were the craftsmen who made things, and then the merchants who sold things. And at the very bottom, so far on the bottom that it's not even on the diagram, are the lowest level, the eta and the enyin. These are two levels that were considered to be unclean, and they were people who were butchers and undertakers and street cleaners and anybody who dealt with either death or waste or things of that nature. If a samurai did not want to swear alliance to a daimyo, they could become a ranyan, which is like a mercenary. Or if the samurai failed their tests, they could also give up their sword and be granted a little bit of land and become a peasant. So this is a shogun, and this is a painting of one of the shoguns. He was the military ruler of Japan. He stayed in modern Tokyo, Edo, and he was total absolute power. He made all the laws and saw to it that the laws were enforced and made the decisions, political decisions, cultural decisions, everything. The emperor and the nobility were there. Again, they were honored, but they couldn't do anything. And they just had inherited titles and some wealth, but not a lot of wealth, not enough wealth to give them power. The daimyo, and here you see the armor of a daimyo. They were military rulers of an area. And again, the number varied between 300 and 200. They held, the areas were called hands. They were required to take part in the Saken Kotai, which we will talk about in a minute. Again, pronunciation. And their importance kind of depended upon their performance during the Saken Kotai. And that included things like economics, their demonstration of good governing when their people were asked about their living conditions and the overall health of their people, and the skills of their samurai. So the daimyo and the samurai were tested. The samurai are the warrior class, and there is a colored photo of a samurai. They were skilled warriors. They were loyal to the daimyo, and above that, the shogun. Again, the Ronin were independent. And when they were tested by their daimyos and shoguns, they had to demonstrate both martial arts and aesthetic disciplines. And we'll talk more in depth about that tomorrow when we talk about the way of the samurai. Samurai were more than just the ability to use a sword. They also had to be smart and skilled in things other than just fighting. There were female samurai, the Unamusha. And before Edo, there was a lot of them. They were very important. They were trained and had the same skills as samurai. There were also, during that time period, female ninjas that were trained differently than male ninjas. But female ninjas became rare during the Edo period. The female samurai were not as powerful during Edo. Their power was limited, but they were a part of it. They fought in battle if they needed to, but their main purpose was to defend the homeland or the Han when the samurai were away. So when the samurai took that trip to be tested with the daimyo, the female samurai were in charge of keeping everybody safe. The photograph that you're looking at is one of the last of these female samurai, and she was the leader of the unit of female samurai that fought in the very last war when the Edo was overthrown and everything ended in 1863-ish. And she was killed during that war. Geisha are female entertainers. They are women who are chosen as young girls for their beauty and their intellect, and they are raised up in a geisha house, which is like a school, and they're trained how to do music and play music and compose music and sing and dance and do calligraphy, perform the tea ceremony, how to have a conversation, how to serve meals correctly, and just how to be graceful and beautiful at all times. Geisha are not prostitutes. They're often confused with courtesans, which were the prostitutes. But the geisha were there as aesthetic companions for nobility and for samurai. They did not associate with lower classes. And I've mentioned this several times, the Sankin Kotai. This was incredibly important during this time period. It happened every other year, and daimyos from all over Japan, all the way north, all the way south, the daimyo and his household had to go to the capital city, to Edo, to see the shogun. And then they had to live in the city for a year, and then they went home and lived at home for a year, and then they came back. The daimyo's wife and children stayed in the city. They couldn't leave. And that was part of the shogun's way to control the daimyo, because if the daimyo rebelled, then his wife and children were at risk. When the daimyo traveled, he had to bring his samurai and other officials. He had to bring his tribute, which would be, depending upon where he lived, crops or products or fish or what have you, and representative members of his community. And the daimyo and the samurai both had to be tested by the shogun. And the daimyo had to prove on this trip that his samurai were sufficiently skilled in both martial arts and aesthetic arts, or, as we think of it here as fine art. He had to prove that his economy was flourishing, and he did that with that gift, and then also that he was governing well. And so the shogun did this to ensure that everybody stayed loyal, because they had to see him all the time, and their wives and children were kept almost like hostages in the city. Because they were tested, the daimyo and the samurai had to be kept in fighting condition. They couldn't get lazy. They had to keep up with education, and they had to be occupied with learning and art. So that didn't give them time to fight among each other or to rebel or do anything but what the shogun wanted them to do. And it also made sure that the daimyos were governing well, treating their people well, and that their taxes got paid. And here is part of one of the woodcuts that show part of the taxes being delivered during this procession. So basically, when they came to the city for this, the daimyo would bring everybody except for the female samurai, the peasants that were living and staying there and keeping everything running. And how this relates to origami, part of the way the samurai was to study an art that would have to be presented or performed in front of the shogun as part of their testing. Origami was one of those arts, but they also, as you'll find out more in the content section, origami was also used as a sacrifice because of the samurai wanting to make sure that he had a firstborn male child, an heir. And that was critical to holding on to his rank. And that is an origami samurai, a samurai that's made out of origami, one sheet of paper. So your assignment for today, and you just need your Chromebook for this, I have a link here to a PBS production, Japan's Memoirs of a Secret Empire. And you can feel free to explore the whole entire thing, but I just want you to do this part. On the landing page right here, you'll see choose a character, and then there's parts of faces from Japanese woodcut illustrations. If you click on that, it will tell you about that person, what they did, and also how they looked, what they wore. So you've got shoguns and samurai and geishas and courtesans and writers and merchants and lots of different people here, daimyos. So kind of explore them, read about them, and then tell me, and it can just be a couple of sentences, if you had to be one, what would you be and why? Okay? And remember, a lot of these were not gender specific. You could be a female samurai. You could be a male geisha, entertainer. It just depends on what you want. Okay? If you've got questions, email me or text me.